Welcome. It is week 5, and we are here for the DFS show here on Football Guys. And we are going to have all your cash game and GPP plays for mainly DraftKings, FanDuel as well, and along with our stacks of the week, and always, as always, our bargain for bargain play. And we're going to start off as we always do. And last week we had a winner of the giveaway that we did, but we've got our DFS captain in here, Devin Knotts, and Devin, maybe announce who won. And of course, you join with Phil Alexander and myself, Jeff Bell.
The previous play is under review, Jeff.
Okay.
There's some timestamp things that we're looking into. We will announce it in the comments. YouTube doesn't make it overly easy to determine when things are posted. So there were things posted on Sunday. We want to make sure everything's legit before we announce the winner. So we'll post in the comments who won. No giveaway this week. We are collectively, within Football Guys, raising money for Asheville, North Carolina. So 100%, I think it's still going on through the 7th. 100% of all Football Guys subscriptions will be donated to food bank down in Asheville. So we're going to be focusing on that and focusing on spending our time doing that this week. We'll have a giveaway back next week. So if you're not a Football Guys subscriber and you're like, hey, I want to help with the hurricane relief, now's a great time because we are making literally zero money from this. It's not net proceeds. It's not net anything. It's gross, baby. So we're just trying to do our part to help out.
Yeah. And Devin, I believe your cracking FanDuel has hit 3 of the last 4 weeks in cash. Yeah. I wonder if maybe I might give some winnings to this as well. So just following Devin's advice. So it's just kind of another avenue that play
it's
it
good
for
karma to give DFS winnings away to charity.
Yeah. Put it that good way. Call there. So Phil, let's start off. Let's go with our games of the week this week as we're looking through this week 5 slate. I know I've got a handful that you're looking at, but where's your board looking?
So the top games on the slate look like Ravens at Bengals with a 49.5 point total and only a 2-point spread in favor of the Ravens. So both of those offenses look to be in play. We've got Cardinals at 49ers up next with a 49-point total, but most of that is leaning San Francisco's way. They're 7.5-point favorites. Packers at Rams. So the Packers were the big surprise last week, and the Rams are a generous defense. Game is being played in LA with a 48.5-point total. And then we've got kind of a marquee matchup on this slate. Bills minus 1-point favorite at the Texans with a 47.5-point total. And it kind of goes downhill from there, although there's one game that's kind of got my spidey sense tingling as a somewhat interesting play. I can't figure out why Colts at Jaguars is a 45.5-point total with the Colts' uncertainty at quarterback and running back, and the Jaguars are the favorites in this game, and they've been absolutely horrendous. Leads me to believe that something's up. Someone knows something in that game. So that's one that we got to keep our eye on as well.
Maybe they know Joe Flacco's going to be the quarterback and they can actually move the ball through the air. But Devin, is there any other games that you have an eye on? Because I know Phil kind of wiped my list out.
No, this week is brutal. We're going to talk about it, but it's one of the worst weeks that we've had in quite some time. There's no value across the board. It's not good. So we'll put it that way.
Yeah, I kind of was talking to some people.
It's apple picking weather, Jeff.
It is very much apple picking weather. Yeah. And I was talking to some people as I was going through doing my consensus tight end ranks. And I said, I don't even know if there's 8 tight ends that I would like to rank this week. But without further ado, we can jump into our cash game lineup. We can look at our quarterbacks and where are we going on quarterback here? Because I know that there's somebody that we've gone to quite a bit the last month that has a pretty good matchup down at the bottom of the list. But where are you building quarterback, Devin?
Who's the person you're referencing?
John Watson, 5,300, going up against Washington.
Yeah, I think that's the open question because Watson certainly is a value play going up against Washington's defense. It's just, and look, he played really well last week. The stats didn't bear it out, but It's so hard, man. I mean, it's just like you wanna have this big game from Watson. It should be coming against Washington. They did look better last week against Arizona. Um, yeah, I think it's a week where it's tough because if there's a quarterback that I would like to get to, it's at $6,200 with Brock Purdy.
Mhm.
Yeah.
I feel safer about that. And does he have the upside that Watson does? I think so. Does he have the floor? Yes, definitely. But going up against Arizona, Arizona's starting to turn into a pumpkin. It's October. Call of Duty's coming out. Kyler Murray's watching strategy guides or doing whatever he's doing instead of watching film. So, yeah, this is the time of year where they just fall apart. So, Brock Purdy's probably the play, but man, it's tough with no value this week because Deshaun Watson certainly is going to be in play for a lot of people. And, there's a theory within the NFL that back against the wall, everyone counts teams out. That team sort of responds. And, the Browns are certainly, if you're buying their share, buying a stock right now, they're a penny stock. So could they turn it around? Certainly. I just feel more comfortable with Brock Purdy this week.
Phil, do you have any other direction that you're looking at quarterback for cash games?
I do. I think there's one more guy in between Purdy and Watson, and that's Geno Smith that you could consider at 5,900. Personally, I would rather find the 300 and get up to Purdy if I could. But look, Geno Smith leads the NFL in passing yards. He's second in completion percentage in the NFL only because Jaden Daniels is completing like a ridiculous 82% of his passes. The TDs are lagging, but if you're leading the league in passing yards, the touchdowns are soon to follow. And even without the touchdowns, he's been over 3x his current salary in 3 out of 4 games this year. The Giants allow about 18 fantasy points to opposing quarterbacks per game, which is right in the range that we're looking for. I think it's hard for Geno Smith to fail in this spot against the Giants. I would prefer him to Deshaun Watson for whatever it's worth. I get the price on Deshaun Watson. He's had good matchups in the past. I've been the guy, I think, bringing him up every week and trying to like sneak him past Devin to see if he'll allow me to play a Browns quarterback in cash. But I think I'm out. I mean, he just for one reason or another, whether it's a pass that flies off of Amari Cooper's hands downfield, like it's just not happening.
The refs calling a holding penalty that no one literally could see a holding penalty. I just have to say something because I got called a Browns hater in week 1 by a lot of people, and they owe me an apology because this team is not very good.
Yeah, I think that there was certainly, I mean, there's always optimism in Bury, Ohio, and we're around the Cleveland Browns. But I think the way that last season ended, the run that they were on with Joe Flacco, I think that certainly people were optimistic about this year. But it's been pretty brutal. I do kind of Jordan Love, I think, is too high at 6,500, and I think that we talked about Devin let off about the value, and I think that the way to probably touch pieces of this Packers passing game is other directions than Love, but that would be the only other one on my board. Running backs, Phil, what are you going with running backs in cash game?
It's interesting. I really don't like the running backs that we have to choose from this week at the prices that they're listed at. And it makes roster construction a little bit difficult. And I think there's going to be some variations on the chalky build. I don't think that we're going to see so many duplicates like we do on some weeks because there's some different levers to pull. I mean, the one thing that I think is a certainty is that I want to play Jordan Mason at 7,400. There's no Bijan, there's no Brees, there's no Kamara on this slate. We mentioned that Arizona is a great matchup for Brock Purdy. They're an equally great matchup for enemy running backs. including 55% more fantasy points allowed than league average over the last 3 weeks. We just saw Jeremy McNichols, for goodness sake, absolutely gash them on the ground along with Brian Robinson. And all Mason does is continue to rattle off 20, 25, 28-point games. They're a big favorite at home. I think that's one that you have to do. Then there's a bunch of ways that you could go, but I think I want to spend up at RB2 right now. And there's a couple different players to do it with. My first one is Kyren Williams at 7,600. I'm not going to argue to anyone that wants to pay down a little bit at running back 2, because that makes it easier to get up to a wide receiver 1 like Nico Collins. So there's Chuba Hubbard. I guess Javonte Williams is somewhat interesting from a point per dollar standpoint, but Kyren Williams, since Cooper Kupp has been out of the lineup, has been plan A, B, and C for the Rams offense. The way to beat the Packers is via the run. They've allowed a pair of 100-yard rushing games this season, and that's not to mention last week when Aaron Jones ran for 93 and picked up another 46 through the air. Williams has seen 20 touches in 3 out of 4 games. He scored at least once in every game. I think he's got the floor and ceiling that I'm after at 7,600, but I want to spin it to Devin and see if he's thinking along the same lines, spending up at both spots, looking for value here to pay up at wide receiver. I could be swayed either way.
Yeah, there's nothing about this slate I like. I'm fine with Kyren Williams. I think if you wanted to go that route, it's certainly he's the primary guy. I agree with Jordan Mason. I mean, look, he doesn't catch passes. We've talked about that ad nauseum. But if I'm just thinking about cash and I can get Mason and Brock Purdy for 13,600, I get a share of almost every touchdown that the 49ers are going to score unless Debo runs one in. So I feel pretty good about that. Like I feel pretty good they're going to score 3 or 4 touchdowns this week. So that like elevates my floor in a week that I don't really feel confident about a floor in general. So normally I wouldn't stack running back and quarterback, but I think this is a week where you certainly could do that. What's going on with Josh Jacobs? Was it just like game script last week where he only had 9 carries? Because the price is good. The matchup should be good. We saw DeAndre Swift tear this Rams defense apart. So I think at 6,400, Jacobs is certainly in play. Caught 4 passes last week against Minnesota. Would like to see him get 16 to 18 carries, but he's gone 16, 32, 14, and 9. And in that 14 and 9, the team won 30 to 14. They dominated from the start, and then last week where he only had 9 carries, the team was behind for pretty much the entire game. So I think certainly Kyren has a higher floor, but Jacobs is still, I guess Emmanuel Wilson is eating into his snap counts, but again, that could be game script dependent. So I think it entirely depends on what you want to do at wide receiver. If you can find value, Kyren is certainly the play to go up to. Otherwise, Jacobs for me would be the pay down point.
What
Javonte,
would you say? What would you say to someone who says if you're going to spend 7,600 on Kyren Williams, why wouldn't you spend 200 more to get up to Derrick Henry, who's absolutely just tearing the cover off the ball right now with back-to-back 30-point outings? Sorry to put you on the spot, but I can't answer the question either.
Personal bias. I mean,
yeah. For me, Derrick Henry is like almost always a fade on DraftKings when he's going to be popular because he doesn't catch passes. But it's very difficult to ignore at this point the way that.
Yeah, he's like minus 300 to score touchdowns. So maybe the answer is Derrick Henry. To be honest, you might have just talked me into it. Yeah, I think the floor is probably higher for Henry than that Rams offense. So if you want to spend up, I would go Henry over Kyren probably. But I don't know. It's entirely personal with Derrick Henry for what he's done over the last couple of years in Tennessee. but I have to get past that personal bias.
So I think you talk about Josh Jacobs there. I think week 2, they obviously lost week 1, didn't have Jordan Love in the lineup, and I think they kind of went out and said, we just got to win this game by hook or by crook, and we're just going to give it to Jacobs over and over again. And yes, game script in the next 2 weeks after that has been a factor in it, but also I think they realized, well, we can't give this guy 35 touches a game. Like, this is a problem. And I think that they kind of do like Emmanuel Wilson, but they've been a little bit more intentional about getting him on the field and giving Jacobs a little bit more of a break. That's kind of just the biggest thing there. But I mean, against the Rams defense, that's been exploitable. A couple touchdowns is definitely in play in that offense. Ken Walker at 6,800 for me, I think, is one that I definitely like going up against the Giants. He's getting a little bit of that discount from playing Monday night, but we saw those 3 touchdowns. I do think he is the lead back unquestionably in that Seattle backfield. I like that matchup quite a bit. They might be fringe cash plays or maybe more GPP plays, but if we're looking at value, Chuba Hubbard at 6,100 has the complete ownership over the Carolina backfield. Playing up against the Bears, that could be a messy game, but the Bears have not been super great against running back in fantasy. Speaking of the Bears, DeAndre Swift at 5,700. I don't know if last week was real or not or what, but they're playing Carolina, and Carolina's also very exploitable by running backs. And then lastly, if Jonathan Taylor's out of the lineup, Trey Sermon at 5,700 is kind of another.
Are they at home? Because he only runs good at Lucas Oil.
You know, I should know.
Big Ten championship. He ran for like 250. It only does well.
I don't think they are. I don't think they are. If the Jaguars are favored, yeah, that's in Jacksonville. So there goes
All right,
that.
I'm out on Trey Sermon.
I'll throw one more name in there as a potential injury away guy. We record on Wednesdays, so we're not going to have the benefit of the Friday practice reports. But Devin Singletary missed practice today with a groin injury. We don't know the severity. Tyrone Tracy is the next man up at 4,300, and I think that would certainly change the way that I'm looking at building a lineup. Tracy hasn't been very good this year. In fact, he's kind of stunk, which was a surprise to me. But I think if you keep throwing an athlete like him at a defense, eventually he's going to bust a couple of big runs. And as a former wide receiver, I think we know he's got the receiving chops for DraftKings. Seattle's run defense is kind of middle of the road. So I think at 4,300, if he opens up by Sunday, I think you have to play him at least as a flex. You lock him in.
I think he's looked good in the passing game, but I think he's struggled. I think Devin Singletary is a pretty strong instinctual runner. I don't know if that Giants line is any good. So I think running the ball, that's where Singletary has looked much better than Tracy, because he kind of just runs into the first defender that he sees. But when they involve him in the passing game, we saw he made a really good play against Dallas, but then that was overturned by a penalty. Had another catch in that game. So that's where I think he can make an impact, and that benefits you in DraftKings. So
we
can set our wide receivers.
Devontae Williams, just to clear that up.
I'm just not going to play a Denver Bronco, to be honest with you, in a game where I have money on the line, but that's where I am right now. But no, we can move into wide receivers now. And Devin, how are you looking to build cash in wide receivers?
I love this wide receiver board. Not because there's like a single guy that is going to be like a must play for me, but there's a number of guys that are intriguing and it's worth a discussion. So I love it more for this discussion than I do like actually playing it, if that makes no sense at all. Trey Tucker is probably my favorite guy at 4,100. Look, I mean, we know Devontae Adams isn't playing. Tucker the last 2 weeks has really stepped up, and Antonio Pierce basically has said he's really stepped up. Didn't have the biggest game last week, but he still has 9 targets and 6 targets over the last 2 weeks. Provides some explosiveness that Jacoby Myers doesn't. Myers is still a fine play. I think he's priced down as well. So if you wanted to go that route, certainly no qualms about it. At Denver, so Myers is probably going to see a lot of Patrick Surtain, which I don't really love for Myers. I kind of like the more versatile Tucker there. Brian Thomas is the next name I'll throw out there. 9 targets in each of his last 2 games, going up against Indy, who doesn't necessarily have a great defense. Tennessee Thomas is the best receiver on that team. I don't care about Christian Kirk. I don't care about Gabe Davis. I don't care about Evan Ingram. I think from an athletic perspective and just an overall pure receiver standpoint, Thomas is number 3 in this class behind Neighbors and Harrison, but he's not that much further behind them. Runs a 4.3, 340. Certainly has that take the top off the defense, kind of like Xavier Worthy, but he's more of a complete receiver than Worthy. So I've named 2 relatively inaffordable guys. I think there's a couple guys as that third receiver that you could really go to. Certainly Nico Collins, and I'll let Phil talk about Nico. If you could fit him in, great. I mean, there's a lineup that I'm building right now that has – you'd have to go to Deshaun Watson, but you could have Kyron Williams, Jordan Mason, Brian Thomas, Trey Tucker, Nico Collins. But Jerry Jeudy is interesting. I'm starting to think Amari Cooper's just going to check out because there's trade rumors. He's in the last year of his contract. He wanted a contract for the season. The Browns told him no. Jeudy had a pretty solid game last week. I think he had 9 targets, 6 for 72. So what's interesting about Jeudy is Kevin Stefanski came out and said he's not in shape. So I don't know what to do with that, because it's like, hey, we want him to get the ball more, but he's not in shape. So Jeudy says he's going to run more during practice this week to try and get in shape. Is that going to wear him out? I don't know what to do with that. The last guy I'll throw out there is Jaden Reed at 6,500. I think he's becoming the number 1 receiver in Green Bay, going up against the Rams defense, which we've talked about. They have no corners, and he's certainly a guy that should have a big week this week.
I said in my column this week that Jerry Jeudy's stat line looks like an ACT question because it's 25 yards, 73 yards, 27 yards, 72 yards. Like, fill in the sequence. What's next?
Yeah, it's like maybe you should have played in the preseason. Just maybe, if you're not in shape. I don't know. It's a culture thing.
Do you have other
bothers me.
Other ones you're targeting here?
Yeah, so Jaden Reed was on my list for cash. I think that when you look at what he's done with Jordan Love in the lineup, 277 yards and 3 touchdowns in 2 games, facing that awful Rams defense that even DJ Moore stopped sulking for long enough to get in the end zone against them last week. We're kind of getting close to an inflection point with his price, I think, as he approaches the 7K range, but 6,500, plenty low enough to play him this week. Same story with Deontay Johnson at 6,100. I mean, I don't see a reason he's not a lock button again on a full PPR site. 14 and 13 targets in the 2 games since Dalton took over, parlayed that into 29 and 21 DraftKings points respectively. Chicago is a tougher matchup than he's faced.
Out there, though.
Sure.
18 mile an hour wind in Chicago.
Okay, wasn't aware of that.
I mean, it's Wednesday, right? So, like, things can obviously change, but it's right on the lake. Tough place to throw the ball in general. If it's above 15, if you look at Chicago in general and see if above 15, it's probably 20 in the stadium, which is probably just a stay away for me. But I hear your point. Definitely cheap.
Yeah, that's a factor. And I was going to say that Chicago is a tougher matchup than he's faced in the last 2 games, but pure volume play for a guy who's pretty blatantly mispriced. But we'll watch the weather. Devin mentioned Nico Collins, and so did I earlier. I mean, he's pretty convincingly the best wide receiver in fantasy football this year. Double-digit targets in 3 straight games, long catch of at least 26 yards in every single game. Not necessarily scared of matchups with him, but if I had a hesitation, it would be that this is the same Buffalo defense that put the clamps on Marvin Harrison in week 1, Tyreek Hill in week 2, even while Tua was still in the game. Zay Flowers didn't do anything last week, even though that might have been more of a function of Baltimore's offensive game plan against the Bills. But he still projects well. It's a high-scoring game. I just haven't decided if I could get there yet with the way that I want to spend on running back. And then for my wide receiver 3 spot, again, I've got some contingencies. I think if Malik Neighbors misses, which as of today, it sounded like he was still in the early stages of the concussion protocol, but I don't know where that goes by Sunday. But if Neighbors is out, Wan'Dale Robinson at $5,600, I think we could pencil in for at least 10 to 12 targets. Um, if Neighbors is healthy, I think 5,600 is too much to spend for a guy that like won't be the reason that you win your matchup, but probably won't be the reason that you lose it either. Just not the way that I like to play. Another contingency, I think Josh Downs at 5,100 if Joe Flacco is the quarterback, and only if Joe Flacco is the quarterback. Although at that point, the same could probably be said of Michael Pittman at 6,000. So the Flacco Anthony Richardson dichotomy will definitely factor into roster construction this week. And then the last name that I have for cash, I'm not so sure it's a cash name, but Dontavian Wicks at 5,000 is someone that I'm at least thinking about. He's cheap at 5K. The advanced metrics last year scream that this guy was a star in waiting. Christian Watson gets hurt. He inherits the full complement of snaps and routes, and he immediately puts up 25 DraftKings points and leaves a lot on the table with a couple of drops. He gets the same matchup boost that Jaden Reed does. I think it's viable to put both him and Reed in a cash game lineup.
At what point, if you're going
if you
that
do
direction,
that though, don't you have to start Jordan Love and just
yeah?
Like if you're gonna play Wicks and Reed, you just kind of have to play Love.
That would be, I don't know, that would feel very extreme for cash, but I also don't play a ton of cash.
Yeah, I mean, if you're gonna take two receivers, I think it's too much. I think you're basically just stacking the game. At that point, you might as well play like a 5-person or a 10-person tournament, like a small I don't want to call it a GPP, but like a small, like one of those cash plus that David Dodge used to call them.
Yes, that's
So
really good advice, actually.
because you're taking on risk by doing that. So I don't know. What were you going to say, Jeff? Sorry, I cut you off.
Wan'Dale Robinson was limited with a heel injury, so that's just kind of monitoring there. But I think he should be fine to play. But no, I was going to say the same thing. At what point, if you're playing Wicks and Reed, do you put Jaden Reed or put Jordan Love into your lineup? You hit Downs there. I wanted to mention Downs. I think that there's contingencies there, and maybe he's my pivot instead of Trey Sermon if Joe Flacco is playing, and I want a piece of that Colts offense. That pretty well covered. Maybe Terry McLaurin at 6,100 is also in that consideration. I think, do we want to see one more week out of cash? But we did see a 100-yard game 2 weeks ago. We saw 10 targets with a touchdown in the last 2 weeks. So that's kind of trending in a good direction. And that's a Cleveland game that, we obviously like the Cleveland side of that going up against Washington. But we can move into tight ends now. And tight end is absolute hellscape. It's just pretty brutal. And I know for me, Tucker Kraft is 3,500 and he plays pretty much every snap for the Packers. And maybe that's my direction that I'm going to look at getting a Packer into my lineup. But I don't like anything at tight end, really.
For me, it's probably just Zach Ertz at 3,800. He has 3 catches or more in every game this year, which if I can get like 6 points out of a tight end under 4K, I'm probably going to take it. Yeah, I mean the Commanders have been one of the worst red zone teams in football. They won a game kicking 7 field goals. So I think that they need to get Ertz more involved. But at some point, regression should tell you that they'll start scoring more touchdowns if they're getting in the red zone more and more. But yeah, I mean it's brutal. Mark Andrews at 4K, I really want to play. But that's just a name at this point. Like it's like Paul McCartney after 1968. It's just a guy. It's not the same person.
When I was looking at kind of my initial look at the numbers this week, I was thinking Mark Andrews. Imagine telling somebody a month ago that Mark Andrews is at 4,000. that Anthony Richardson is at 6,200, and you're not putting either of them into your lineup.
Yeah, it's rough. I mean, if you want to spend up, I think there's guys you can feel okay about. Like I feel okay about George Kittle, but not spending unless value comes up where Singletary is out or, we get certainly more than we have on Wednesday. But as of right now, it's these sub 4K guys, and I'm going to try and avoid getting a zero. Like that's all I'm trying to do.
Yep, that's my strategy exactly, and my play to get that 5 to 8 points from my tight end is Colby Parkinson at 3,700. So I guess I am really super stacking this Green Bay LA Rams game. If that one duds, this would be a heck of a lineup to play. But um, I think he's just the safest to get you like at least 5 out of all these guys in this range. He never leaves the field. He gets 5 or 6 targets a game. I guess it helps that the Packers have given up tight end touchdowns in back-to-back weeks. I mean, it's kind of like a pick your poison thing. I don't think you could spend up to Kittle, or like a Brock Bowers looks okay this week in terms of projections with Devontae Adams out, but I don't think you could get there, or I don't think you should try to in cash anyway.
So sorry for bringing the mood down with tight ends, but make sure to head to footballguys.com/plans to become a Hall of Fame subscriber. Hall of Fame subscribers get access to all DFS content for less than $20 monthly or $95 annually. We also have the GOAT tier available now in our subscriptions. We are selling a limited number of GOAT tier subscriptions that gives you access to all the content, and it also gives you access to special channels in Discord and special meetups that you can do with staff members. And so check that out if you want to. We can go into our GPP plays now. We open up the board and hit some GPPs. And who have we not mentioned quarterbacks, Phil, that you would be looking to get into a GPP lineup?
Yeah, Josh Allen is projecting for about 2% ownership, and he has a slate breaking ceiling. There's a solid game total there, a beatable matchup against Houston. And anytime I could use Josh Allen as a leverage play in tournaments, I want to do it. And that's usually because he has like a terrible matchup or the team is in a bad spot or something. But this one doesn't make sense because it's fine. The game environment is good. And I feel like this is one of those, this doesn't have to be hard kind of plays if you see him coming in with that kind of roster percentage. Similarly low on the list in terms of where the crowd is moving this week is Kyler Murray at 6,700. I mean, it's been pretty scary with him. He's been showing us his floor lately, but I think that should once again depress his ownership after he really played poorly against Washington last week, after they were kind of a doormat to opposing quarterbacks for the rest of the year. Tough matchup in San Fran, so it's justified the low ownership, but I also think he's going to be forced to reach into his bag if they're going to keep up from a point chasing standpoint there. I don't see James Conner having a ton of success unless it comes as a pass catcher. So I do think that they're going to be throwing often. I do think he's going to be running around and trying to make plays. Outside of that, you could spend up to Lamar Jackson. I think he's a great play this week against Cincinnati and those linebackers, the way that they've been playing. But I'll kick it over to Devin. I've got one more if he doesn't mention this guy. That's kind of a gross one.
I don't have any gross plays on my board, so you can certainly keep that in your back pocket. Joe Burrow going up against Baltimore. A lot of people are going to be looking at Baltimore's defense and saying, nah, not for me. Joe Burrow is projected to be about 3% rostered. Pretty easy stack with Jamar Chase. And Baltimore's defense, they looked better last week against Buffalo, but this is still a defense that allowed 379-2 to Dak Prescott, 276-1 to Gardner Minshew, and 291-1 to the very average Patrick Mahomes this year. So I think Burrow, like the ceiling game is coming. It's teams got off to certainly a slow start compared to their expectations, but T. Higgins should be coming more and more healthy, and they're at home. So Lamar Jackson is the other one on the other side of that game. So I think that this game potentially could be a sneaky shootout. Lamar Jackson, very similar to Josh Allen, where he's 7% rostered, which is just too low. And a lot of the ownership this week, as of Wednesday, is going to Geno Smith and Anthony Richardson. Like, we're really doing Anthony Richardson at 15% rostered? Not for me. So if I'm going to spend up, it's probably going to be to Burrow at 64 or go all the way up to Jackson. I don't mind Josh Allen. I don't know. That run defense is pretty solid. And I want rushing touchdowns from Allen. So I'm probably certainly too low at 2%, but I think Jackson at 8% is still too low as well. One name, this might be your gross one. I'll let you go first. You can go with the gross one.
All right, my gross play is Trevor Lawrence at 5,700, who hasn't eclipsed 50 DraftKings points in a game this year. The Jaguars look horrible. I'm pretty sure that Doug Peterson, who had to come out and tell people today that he hasn't lost the locker room, has in fact lost the locker room in a shocker. It's bad over there, but just remember, this is that weird game total that I talked about in the open when we talked about Vegas lines. We're expecting some points here. Indianapolis is certainly not a good defense. And last week, I noticed that in terms of the quality of DFS players who were playing Trevor Lawrence, he was a pretty sharp play. It didn't work out. It made no one money. In fact, it lost them money. But that happens to sharp plays sometimes. I'm going to go back to the well one more time. I like BTJ, Brian Thomas Jr., that Devin mentioned. I think that's a good stack. And I'm willing to roll it out there in tournaments because I don't think anybody else is.
I mean, not only has he been bad, and people get so mad at me on Twitter because my new thing is just calling his contract the worst contract in sports, which it is. But he's had games where he should be getting garbage time, and he's not even doing that, right? So it's down 47-10 against Buffalo. You should be able to throw for more than 178 yards. I don't know if he's hurt. I don't know. Like, he had a down. He wasn't that great last year either. Like, 4,000 yards, 21 touchdowns, 14 picks. People have this like thing stuck in their mind that he's going to elevate to the next level because he's 24 and got hyped up to like being one of the best prospects ever. But it's tough. It's, I just don't see the player that has that huge upside. But certainly in a 1 week sample, anybody can do anything. But like, I don't know that it's a sharp play to keep playing Trevor Lawrence. I'll put it that way. So if the Sharps want to lose their money, by all means, go for it.
I think he's getting hit, and he's getting hit a lot, and I don't think he's setting his feet because he's missing. All of his misses are high. The ball's kind of sailing on him. The ball's rising when it gets to receivers, and so I just don't think he's. And he's gun shy right now because I don't know that the offensive line can protect him. I think that that's probably the problem there. You mentioned the high rostership for Anthony Richardson this week. If he does scratch, do you think that those players are going to pivot just to Joe Flacco and maybe use the savings to go in a different direction? Or do you think that Flacco would be a potential pivot off if Richardson's out of the lineup?
I think Flacco would come in pretty low, if not too low, but certainly you're not going to have just a direct pivot because of the lack of rushing upside. I think.
I mean, do people really want to play Anthony Richardson even if he plays, coming off the injury, not being able to finish games, not being able to throw the ball?
Good. The matchup's good, facing Jacksonville, who has one of the worst pass defenses in the NFL. The problem is Anthony Richardson doesn't take advantage of bad matchups or good matchups because he can't throw the ball.
Right.
And he's not running the ball. So
right. And he's coming off an injury where he's probably going to be a little bit shy to run the ball again.
Yeah. And he could get knocked out of the game again.
One where like he's 13% on Wednesday or 15% on Wednesday. I don't see any world where he stays that high. And if he does, then I'm going to start playing more GPPs this week.
Totally agree.
Let's move into running backs here. And Phil, what are you looking at for the running back slate?
Yeah, so one of the guys that you mentioned at the end of the cash game section, Jeff, was DeAndre Swift at 5,700. This one is going to come down to roster percentage for me. I think, anything above 15% is probably going to be too high. And it's one of those things that I've been battling with. I mean, this guy was probably the worst running back in the NFL for the first 3 weeks of the season. Couldn't get anything going. And then last week against the Rams, he looked like the most optimistic DeAndre Swift fan could have hoped for in the preseason. So I'm kind of in the middle of those two extremes. I mean, Khalil Herbert was out of the equation last week, which I think is good for Swift. They were getting him the ball in the passing game, which is obviously a key to unlocking him. And he does get Carolina, which is a fantastic matchup, the best one that there is for running back. So, like I said, I think there's a very high bust potential there because he really stunk for 3/4 of the young season. So it's going to come down to where those final projections land. The other one that's on my list was also one that Devin mentioned for cash games. I think Josh Jacobs is kind of a pure leverage play because I think if I'm tempted to play two Packers wide receivers in cash, there might be some other folks out there with that same inkling. So that tells me that both of those guys, Reed and Wicks, as well as Tucker Kraft, but I just couldn't physically put any more Packers into the same lineup. All three of those guys are going to be really popular. So if that happens, I think Josh Jacobs, especially because his usage has been a little wonky the last 2 weeks with the weird game scripts, I think he becomes a leverage play where you play him either in the same lineup as Love to make your Love stack more unique, or in a lineup where you don't play any Packers pass catchers. You could use Jacobs to be a differentiator. And then the last name on my list is probably a controversial one given the news that came out of New England today, where Jared Mayo said that he's considering benching Ramondre Stevenson, or rather starting Antonio Gibson over Ramondre Stevenson because of Stevenson's fumbling issues that he's had this season. So now it becomes interesting because I believe, based on that soundbite, his ownership percentage ought to plummet. Right? People are going to be scared to play him now, but he's in a fantastic matchup. And, just running projections as if that quote never happened. For me, Stevenson looked like one of the best point per dollar values on the slate. So maybe we should be taking Mayo at his word, but Antonio Gibson fumbles a lot too. Like, it's not like they're putting in, I don't even know who a non-fumbly guy is to give an example of, but they're not exactly
coaching tree where you can't hold on to the ball. It's like
right. So maybe we should be taking him at his word, but I think
who was the LSU running back that they had, and then they just kicked to the curb like 5 or 6 years ago. I forget his name. Anyway.
Yeah. So I just think that the roster percentage is going to come down to the point where I'm willing to make the bet that this guy's trying to light
it's at 3% right now, so it really can't get much lower.
It could only get lower. So
yeah. Anyway, I have a couple guys. Jerome Ford, 5,800. This is entirely matchup dependent. A little bit narrative-y because Nick Chubb is coming back likely next week, maybe the following. So Ford his time is limited as the starting running back. DraftKings points to number one running backs against Washington this year. Rashad White, 17, Devin Singletary, 16, Zach Moss, 21, James Conner, 21. If he's at least just even adequate, we know he has big play potential. He's not a great real-life running back, but he has that. He can pop one. And he's going relatively underlooked a little bit. He's right now he's at 8% rostered. So you're getting a matchup that's favorable. Everyone wants to play the pass catchers against Washington, but I think he's certainly in play. I'm fading Jordan Mason just because he's going to be like 40% rostered, and it's too high for a running back that doesn't catch passes. If he doesn't, I mean, what's the difference between Mason and Derrick Henry right now? I don't think there's a lot there. Yes, Henry's $400 more, but he's also like half the ownership as of Wednesday night. So I think if you're going to go to the high end, I would much rather go with Henry over Mason. Then just looking down, like there's not Devin Achane, and I have no inclination to play. I think Trey Sermon is interesting in a GPP, but going up against Jacksonville. And then Chuba Hubbard's last name I'll throw out there. The matchup's tough, and we talked about it already, but catches passes. And if it is really windy, I think you could see a game where they check more passes down to the running back rather than try and throw the ball down the field.
I don't know that I love the matchup, but Brian Robinson Jr., I think, has a chance to have a lion's share role going up against the Browns there. Zamir White picked up an injury today in practice, and Alexander Madison has been better than Zamir White anyways and has the touchdowns, and Zamir White does not. If Zamir White's a scratch, they don't really have another back that can handle any sort of load. It's kind of Amir Abdullah and then Dylan Lobby if they go up that direction. So there could be a lot of rushing on in kind of an ugly knockout game there with Alexander Madison. That's really gross. That's really, really gross.
It's not gross. It's just like, this is, I mean, how many times, Bill will know this, how many times on this show have we talked about Alexander Madison because Dalvin Cook is injured and he never does anything ever. Yeah. It's like this guy gets more opportunities because he looks like Dalvin Cook and looks like an NFL running back. But man,
he's been better than Zamir White.
But that's like, yeah, I'm going to make a joke that'll get me in trouble. I'm not going to do that, but Zamir White's not good either.
All right. What do we got for wide receivers here?
Phil, you can go.
You want me to go first? Sure. So I'm going to say, depending on if he plays, I think Malik Neighbors is a great play for tournaments because I think people are going to be a little bit leery if he's coming off an injury late in the week. But this is Malik Neighbors, who outside of Nico Collins might be the best wide receiver in fantasy football already. So 7,300, lowish roster percentage, pass defense that hasn't really been tested much in Seattle. Jamar Chase, 8,000. He's starting to roll 203 yards and 3 touchdowns in his last 2 games. People are probably thinking that that's matchup driven because the Bengals have played soft defenses the last 2 weeks. But as Devin alluded to, Baltimore isn't exactly a stout defense this year. They've allowed about 20% more fantasy points to wide receivers than league average. So the matchup is actually in Chase's favor based on those numbers. Down the list in terms of roster percentage, Marvin Harrison Jr. at 7,500. He's pretty consistently been what I would consider a poor play at this price. But
people are chasing that week 2 result. In like week 2, he was a really good play because no one wanted to play him after week 1, and now people are trying to just chase that and think that that's his upside every week, which I don't necessarily think it is. I mean, maybe he'll have 1 or 2 more of those types of games, but I
think he's got 1 or 2 more of them in him, and it does correlate to the Kyler Murray play that I mentioned earlier. I think Arizona is going to be throwing a lot. That could only be good for Harrison. So if there is a ceiling game coming, again, I don't expect Arizona to have any luck against the front line there in San Francisco. Then the only other name that I've got, I'm assuming Nico Collins is going to be popular. We've talked about him a bunch, and people obviously want to play him because he's been so great. We've got another. This is the second revenge game for Stephon Diggs, right? And this one might be a little bit more personal. So I'm even gonna say if we fade Collins and we fade the Diggs narrative, because that's probably going to be everybody's first pivot, Tank Dell should be back this week. He's only 5,400. Everybody forgot about him. He's cheap. He's explosive. And I think it's a matter of time before he has some games that are just going to blow past a $5,400 salary. So I don't think that Diggs is a terrible idea, by the way, but I think Dell, much cheaper and probably lower rostered, is a better idea.
I have nothing to add on Dell other than he pays a guy to stand on the sideline to wear his giant diamond encrusted number 3 necklace, which is pretty
Got to
funny
play
when
him.
this like overweight white guy wearing this like awesome number 3 diamond encrusted chain. I'll have to see if I can find a picture of it, but it's pretty hilarious. Cortland Sutton, and I know before you guys throw up, taking a Denver wide receiver, 9 targets and 11 targets in his last 2 games. Who else do they have to throw the ball? He has 60 yards in each of his last 2 games. The weather was horrific against the Jets last week, and he was a big part of that victory. So I don't think he's the worst play. Certainly has big play upside that we've seen over the course of the last couple of seasons. Trey Tucker, I already talked about in cash. I think he's an excellent. You have something to say?
Well, I was
Would
just going
you?
to say, if Bo Nix can
Oh.
throw for 80 yards, then Cortland Sutton has a chance to get 80 yards. So there you go.
So that was also what I was going to say is, are you willing to stack Bo Nix with Cortland Sutton so you get
You
Nix?
get 100% of the passing
No,
game
I'm not
production if
stacking.
you
I'm not stacking Bo Nix with
Bo
Cortland
Nix
Sutton.
and Cortland Sutton.
I mean, Aaron Rodgers didn't tear it up either, so like there's some weather things there. But the 6 for 9 for negative 10 yards was like the most Bo Nix stat line of all time at halftime. In the first, it was deep in the second quarter. I talked about Trey Tucker. I talked about Jerry Jeudy. I talked about Brian Thomas. Certainly, those guys can be carried over into GPPs. If Joe Flacco plays, I think Michael Pittman Jr. is a great play at $6,000. We saw what Amari Cooper could do with Flacco last year. Certainly, it can elevate that number 1 receiver. The pass rush worries me a little bit for Jacksonville getting to the largely immobile Flacco, but I think that Pittman at 6K is just underpriced. You mentioned Jamar Chase. He's probably my favorite high-end option this week, given the matchup. And then I think DK Metcalf's been like really underrated. And 7K, he's gone over 100 yards in each of his last 2 games, I believe. So certainly a big reason why Geno Smith is leading the league in passing yards.
Khalil Shakir at 5,900 is potential for big plays, potential for some accumulation there, and especially in a shootout type matchup. I remiss. I did not mention James Cook in the running back section. I think he could be a play there too, and especially if you wanted to go with Josh Allen or even kind of pivot off Josh Allen. If you really wanted to get a little bit risky and go kind of with a direct pivot off of some popular plays, Romeo Doubs at 5,400 kind of gives you, if you're assuming the Packers are going to throw it on the Rams, which I think that they're going to, he's going to be on the field almost every single snap. So that kind of gives you a chance there that maybe he is the guy that gets the 2 touchdowns or something to that effect. Kind of same game there, Jordan Whittington at 4,600. It's kind of, I think there's a lower ceiling player there, but in full PPR, I think Whittington has the potential to be a Cooper Kupp light type in that offense. We saw 8 targets last week, so that's there. And then probably watching the injury report, and especially if Devin Singletary and Malik Neighbors is out, Darius Slayton at 3,900 looked okay against the Cowboys, but I don't know if that's an offense that you want to touch without Malik Neighbors and without Devin Singletary going on there. Tight end. Anything else here, Devin, on tight end?
Yeah, David Njoku is limited in practice this week, so he was 4 for 44 in his first game against Dallas, and certainly would provide them an option to throw the ball to in Cleveland. But I don't know; it's an ugly position this week.
Got any life preservers out here for anybody, Phil?
No, just what I mentioned earlier is that if you're going to pay up, tournaments is the place to do it with tight ends. And Kittle at 5,600 looks like the best play on the board. We want our tight ends in spots where they could catch touchdowns. And when they're at home and heavy favorites and they have a high implied total, that's usually the sweet spot for tight end touchdowns. And then, like I said earlier, Brock Bowers, it didn't materialize last week, but he should stand to benefit along with Trey Tucker, and maybe even more than Tucker, because Denver has really been taking away enemy wide receivers. We saw that really last week against the Jets, but they traditionally struggle against tight ends. So I think it might be a little bit easier for Bowers to maneuver against that defense. And in tournaments, he's coming off of a down week when people played him, so I think he's a good play.
All right, let's do our favorite stacks of the week. And Phil, what's your favorite stack of the week?
I guess I should just give the people my cash game lineup, right? It's a huge game stack with Green Bay and the Rams. You got Jordan Love, you got Jaden Reed, and then rotate in whatever Packer you want into that double stack. You mentioned Dubs ought to make it unique. Josh Jacobs ought to make it unique. Tyler Kraft and Dontavian Wicks will make it a little chalkier, so you'll have to get different elsewhere to get the total roster percentage of that lineup down. And then you run it back. You got Kyron Williams. You got Jordan Whittington, who you mentioned. You got Tutu Atwell, who's a big play threat. I'll leave it at one stack for the first time in about 2
Did you
years.
just take 6 guys in the same lineup?
I did.
He's got to get to his requisite 12 players one way or the other. So there you
That's
go.
right.
52-49 in that game. Look out. Joe Burrow, Jamar Chase. We already talked about it.
Homer pick, Josh Allen, James Cook, Khalil Shakur. Bills get healthy. All right, let's do our favorite discount plays of the week. Phil, what's your favorite discount play of the week?
Yeah, so you mentioned Jordan Whittington at 4,600, and I think Devin called him out as a value play last week and had the right of it. I was a week early. I think he was my value play 2 weeks ago because I assumed what was going to happen this past week was going to happen 2 weeks ago, but it took a little bit of time for them to trust him with those Cooper Cup targets. But now that we've seen it and he's had some reps doing it, I don't see why he wouldn't continue at 4,600 in a game that I really like. I think he could be more of a breakout and less of a PPR only type of play.
Yeah, I mean, for me, it's Trey Tucker. I've talked about him the whole show. I think he's in line for a big game this week. Maybe not 100 yards, but certainly enough to pay off that 4,100 price point with upside to catch a potential touchdown.
Yeah, mine's going to be Tucker Kraft at 3,500 on the tight ends. I just think that I feel like I'm going to punt on anything above that, really, and anything below that just isn't going to be on the field or get the ball, and so I kind of end up there at 3,500 with Kraft and gives you other directions to go and touches that stack like Phil has mentioned multiple times that I think that's a great direction to go, getting pieces of that Packers game. Kraft is an every down player, and Luke Musgrave, I believe, is on the injury report this week too, so that's something else to watch. But Devin, why don't you send the people out?
Yeah, week 5. It's an ugly week. Go apple picking with the family. And this entire slate could change if value comes out open. So keep that in mind. We're recording on Wednesday. We'll drop the link for helping Asheville. If there's anything you guys can do, I mean, even if it's a what's our cheapest subscription, Jeff? You would know, like $6 or $7 for a single month. I think that would even qualify for that. So even if you just have a couple dollars to throw at it, again, we're making nothing for it. It's entirely to help the food bank and help the people down there.